Shadows of Florence. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment if you want more deep dives into the darkest corners of criminal justice. You won't want to blink for a second of this one. The rain had been falling in hard sheets for hours, turning the narrow streets of downtown Florence, Colorado, into a mirror of fractured neon. Sirens screamed in the distance, but closer, in an alley that smelled of wet asphalt and rust, something far more sinister had taken place. Detective Clara Hawthorne crouched behind a dumpster, her coat soaked, eyes locked on the scene unfolding a few feet away. A man in a cheap gray hoodie lay sprawled across the pavement, his face hidden in a puddle, his fingers twitching unnaturally. "Jesus, who would do this in broad daylight?" muttered her partner, Detective Miles Griffin, checking the perimeter for any surveillance cameras. Every instinct in Clara's body screamed that this wasn't a random act of violence. Too calculated. Too deliberate. Above them, the towering walls of ADX Florence loomed on the horizon, visible through the storm's haze like a steel fortress. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, it was a place whispered about in law enforcement circles and feared in equal measure by anyone who knew its reputation. But tonight, it wasn't the inmates that drew attention, it was a package. A black duffel bag, torn slightly at one corner, its contents hidden, yet radiating a silent menace. Clara approached cautiously, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching. The bag contained files, meticulously organized, detailing the lives of every high-risk inmate inside ADX Florence. Names, histories, security schedules, information that could destabilize the most secure prison in America. "Someone just smuggled classified intel into the city," Griffin said, his voice low. "And whoever did it knows exactly what they're playing with." As they examined the bag, the rain intensified, washing away potential fingerprints. Clara noticed something odd, a single key taped to the inside flap of the duffel, rusted and old. It didn't belong to any standard prison lock. Her stomach tightened. Hours earlier, a call had come in from a corrections officer at ADX, claiming that one of the maximum security isolation cells had been breached. The officer's voice had trembled. We're missing someone. He shouldn't exist outside that cell. Not ever." The detectives knew the name immediately. Leonard Shiv Kovac, a man who had been convicted for multiple homicides, terrorist connections, and high-profile heists, now supposedly confined to 23-hour-a-day solitary lockdown for decades. Every protocol was in place to prevent his escape. Yet here, in the middle of a rain-soaked alley, evidence suggested otherwise. Clara's mind raced. How could a man like Kovac disappear from the most secure prison in the country? Who had helped him? And why now? The city didn't know yet, but the world was about to. Then came the phone call that made her blood run cold. A recorded voice, distorted electronically, whispered a chilling message. "You're looking in the wrong place. Check inside before it's too late." The line went dead. No number. No trace. Just an ominous warning. By the time they secured the duffel, a car roared down the alley and disappeared into the storm. Clara checked the license plate. It had been stolen days ago from an unmarked government vehicle. Someone was sending a message, and it wasn't meant for the police. Back at headquarters, they opened the duffel fully and found it stuffed with more than files. Photographs of ADX Florence's interior, handwritten notes, and strange diagrams of the prison layout. Every inch of the Supermax had been mapped. Every guard shift accounted for. Whoever had done this had intimate knowledge of the facility's most dangerous secrets. As the night wore on, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that each step forward would bring them closer to danger. And she was right. In the shadows of a darkened office, a man in a trench coat observed the detective's every move, his lips curling into a grim smile. The game was no longer about catching Kovac. It was about surviving the truth. Finally, just as dawn threatened to break through the storm clouds, a discovery stopped them cold. Taped under the duffel was a single envelope. Inside was a note, written in a precise, chilling hand. "Not everyone in Florence is who they seem. Look inside your own walls." Clara stared at it, heart pounding, realizing the depth of betrayal she hadn't yet understood. The storm outside mirrored the one rising inside the city, a storm that would expose secrets the world was never meant to see. And then, the phone rang again. This time, the number traced back to inside ADX itself. Clara hesitated. She knew, whatever awaited on the other end, nothing would ever be the same. Inside the walls, the morning fog clung to the steel towers of ADX Florence like a shroud, masking the enormity of the fortress from prying eyes. Inside, the prison hummed with the cold rhythm of fluorescent lights, locked gates, and steel doors that could crush a man in seconds. But somewhere in those walls, Leonard Shiv Kovac was no longer a prisoner. He had become a phantom. Warden Harris paced his office, a map of the Supermax spread across the table. Every solitary cell, every security camera, every motion sensor, nothing had been overlooked. Yet somewhere Kovac had slipped past all of it. And worse, someone on the inside had helped him. The thought churned Harris's stomach. Who could betray ADX Florence? And why now? Detective Clara Hawthorne had been granted temporary clearance to investigate within the prison, a rare concession, but even she felt the oppressive weight of the walls pressing down on her. Walking the corridors, she could hear the metallic echo of distant footsteps, the low murmur of guards, the faint cries of men whose names she would never know. Every shadow seemed alive, every door a potential trap. Clara met with Officer Samuel Reed, a corrections officer who had reported the first irregularities. His eyes darted nervously as he handed her a small set of keys, marked with codes that didn't exist on any official register. These weren't supposed to be accessible, Reed whispered. I don't know where they came from or who gave them to him. The duo started their inspection in Range 13, one of the most secure units in the prison. As they walked, Clara noticed subtle irregularities, a lock that had been picked and resealed, surveillance footage gaps that didn't match any official maintenance logs, and a faint smear of blood on the edge of a steel door. Not enough to indicate a struggle, but enough to suggest Kovac had been there. Hours passed. Each clue pointed to a methodical, almost surgical escape. The walls themselves seemed to whisper secrets, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling of eyes tracking her every move. The deeper they delved, the more she realized the enormity of the conspiracy. Someone had planned this for months, possibly years, and the fallout would ripple far beyond the prison's boundaries. Then came the first shock. In a hidden maintenance hatch, they discovered a small, unmarked room. Inside, stacks of confidential files, prison schematics, and surveillance recordings were spread across the floor. But more troubling than that, there was a video, grainy, black and white, taken from an internal camera. It showed Kovac not escaping, but walking freely among the staff, wearing uniform that should have been impossible for him to access. Clara's hands shook as she rewound the footage. The man next to him, handing him a tray of food, wasn't just any officer. It was Officer Reed. Her heart sank. Was he a double agent? Or had he been coerced? Either way, the betrayal ran deep. Outside the prison, a storm was gathering. News reports hinted at the leak. ADX Florence, the fortress thought impenetrable, was compromised. Families of guards received cryptic threats. Anonymous tips flooded the FBI. The world was watching, and somewhere, Kovac was already steps ahead. Clara knew one thing. The duffel bag had been just the beginning. Every file inside hinted at a network reaching far beyond Florence, into cities, governments, and shadowy corners of the law. And with each revelation, the danger grew, because the conspirators weren't just protecting secrets, they were willing to eliminate anyone who got too close. The night fell, and inside the Supermax, Clara and Griffin pieced together the last fragments of the puzzle. The walls of the prison, once symbols of absolute security, now seemed like a labyrinth. Every locked door was a potential threat, every corridor a trap. And then, the most chilling discovery of all, a handwritten note tucked inside the maintenance room, addressed to Clara personally. It read, "You're closer than you think, but some walls aren't meant to be crossed. Look behind the mask, or the next one to disappear will be you." Clara's blood ran cold. Someone inside the prison was orchestrating a game, one that didn't care about rules or morality. And now she was a piece on their board. As she turned to leave, a metallic clink echoed through the empty corridor. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approached from behind. She spun around, just in time to catch a glimpse of a figure disappearing into a shadowed doorway. Not Kovac. Someone else. Someone she hadn't accounted for. And that's when it hit her. The escape, the files, the betrayal. It wasn't just about Kovac. It was about every secret buried in those walls, and someone was determined to expose them, no matter the cost. The door slammed shut behind her, locking with a precision that made her blood run cold. The game had moved inside, and Clara knew one undeniable truth. To survive the next hours, she would have to confront not just the criminals on the outside, but the shadows lurking within ADX Florence itself. The reckoning. The steel door clicked behind Detective Clara Hawthorne, sealing her in a narrow service corridor. The shadows seemed to pulse with menace, and every heartbeat echoed like a gunshot in the confined space. Somewhere deep within the prison, Leonard Shiv Kovac was moving with a precision that only a man who had spent years in isolation could possess. But tonight, he wasn't just surviving, he was orchestrating a reckoning. Clara's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the cold concrete walls, the occasional flicker of surveillance monitors, and the faint smears that told stories no one wanted to read. She could hear the hum of the prison's electrical systems, the distant clanging of gates, and then a whisper. Not human, not fully, but intentional. A message. Clara. She spun, but the corridor was empty. Her mind raced. Someone else knew she was here, and whoever it was wasn't there to help. She had to move, had to think faster than the predator who had turned a fortress into a hunting ground. Back in Range 13, Officer Samuel Reed sat at a surveillance terminal, sweat running down his face. He had been compromised, coerced into aiding Kovac, but he wasn't loyal. He wasn't a killer. Yet now, trapped in the eye of the storm, he knew the only way to survive was to play the hand he had been dealt. Using a stolen access code, he sent Clara a brief, cryptic message. The truth is under the warden's desk. Hurry. Clara bolted, her boots clanging against the metal grates as she navigated the labyrinthine halls of the prison. She knew the risk. Kovac was intelligent, a master manipulator who thrived on fear and chaos. Every corridor could be a trap, every room a stage for betrayal. When she reached the warden's office, the scene froze her in her tracks. The desk drawers had been ransacked. Papers were scattered across the floor, a computer monitor smashed. And there, in the center of the chaos, a thick envelope marked ADX Secrets waited for her, almost tauntingly. Inside were documents and video recordings, exposing a web of corruption that extended far beyond Florence. Guards had been paid to overlook smuggling operations. High-profile inmates had been experimented on under the guise of psychological research. And, most shocking of all, the chain of betrayal included top officials in Washington who had quietly sanctioned extreme measures, hidden from the public eye, hidden from oversight. As Clara processed the magnitude of the revelations, an alarm blared throughout the prison. Kovac had been sighted on the upper floors, moving like a shadow through the labyrinth. The hunters had become the hunted, and now the walls themselves seemed alive, closing in. Clara and Reed raced to intercept him. In the control room, they found Kovac standing calmly, as if expecting them, a faint smile curling on his lips. "Detective Hawthorne," he said, his voice low and chilling, "you've done well to make it this far. But some truths are too dangerous to be released." Clara's heart pounded. "You think you're in control? You're trapped, Kovac. Florence isn't leaving you." He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Control is an illusion, Detective. The walls contain bodies, yes, but they don't contain the mind. And the mind is freedom." Before she could react, Kovac pressed a button on a hidden panel. The doors to the upper floors locked, isolating them from every backup and backup system. Every exit now led to dead ends. It was a psychological cage, and Kovac was the architect. But Reed, trembling but resolute, had one final move. Using a concealed override he had memorized during months of coerced planning, he triggered the emergency lockdown release. Steel doors groaned and shifted. Lights flickered. Kovac's calm facade faltered, just for a heartbeat. That was all Clara needed. She lunged, catching him off guard, handcuffs slamming around his wrists. The aftermath was brutal, but necessary. Kovac was secured, the evidence recovered, and the conspiracy laid bare for federal investigators. ADX Florence, though scarred, survived, but the world had seen cracks in its armor. Weeks later, Clara walked past the perimeter walls, watching the Supermax recede in the distance. She felt the weight of what had been uncovered, the corruption, the manipulation, the human cost. And then came the final, haunting revelation. A new file appeared in the evidence locker. One she hadn't seen before. Inside was a photo. Not of Kovac. Not of Reed. But a shadowy figure in a dark coat, outside the prison walls, watching. And scribbled beneath it, in the same chilling handwriting from before. "This isn't over. Not yet." Clara shivered. The storm had passed, but the shadows remained. Some truths, she realized, were never fully contained. And as the sun set behind the Rockies, the fortress of Florence stood silent, but the fear it had contained now roamed free. If you thought the story was intense, hit subscribe. The real world behind Supermax isolation is darker than you think, and the next story will take you even deeper into the shadows.